In 2007, two men bought the exact same house on the exact same street for the exact same price, $300,000. Same neighborhood, same year, same market. One man paid for it in cash. He saved for 10 years, worked overtime, skipped vacations, and finally handed over a check with no bank involved, no interest, no debt. He owned it outright, free and clear on day one. The other man put down $60,000 and borrowed the rest. He signed loan papers. He agreed to pay interest for 30 years. On paper, he was in debt. On paper, he owed a bank $240,000. If you asked most people which one made the smarter financial decision, almost everyone would say the man who paid cash. No debt, no risk, no bank breathing down his neck. But 15 years later, something strange happened. The man who borrowed the money was worth almost 4 times more than the man who paid in cash. Same house, same neighborhood, same starting point, completely different outcome. And here's what nobody tells you. This isn't some rare fluke. This exact pattern repeats itself across almost every wealthy family, every successful business, every self-made millionaire you've ever heard of. Most people are taught that debt is dangerous, that it's a trap, that the road to financial freedom is paved with zero balances and paid off credit cards. But the wealthiest people on earth don't avoid debt. They chase it. They negotiate for it. They structure their entire financial lives around it. So why does debt destroy some people and build fortunes for others? Why do banks hand billionaires more money at lower rates than they'd ever offer you? And what did that second homeowner understand that the first one never learned? By the end of this video, you'll understand something that separates the wealthy from everyone else. And once you see it, you'll never look at a loan the same way again. In this video, you're going to discover the hidden difference between debt that destroys you and debt that builds you, a distinction almost nobody explains properly. You'll learn why the richest families in the world borrow money on purpose, even when they have enough cash sitting in the bank to pay for everything outright. You'll see the exact psychological trap that keeps ordinary people trapped in bad debt for decades, while the wealthy use the same tool to multiply what they already have. But here's the part that surprises most people. The reason rich people love debt has almost nothing to do with the money itself. It's about something far more powerful. And once you understand it, you'll start noticing it everywhere. In real estate, in business, even in the way billionaires talk about their own companies. Let's start with the story of a man who turned a single loan into an empire, and why the bank was practically begging him to take their money. In the early 1990s, a young real estate investor named Sam walked into a bank asking for a loan to buy an old, run-down apartment building. The building was ugly, paint peeling, half the units empty, a leaking roof. Sam had almost no cash. What he did have was a plan. He borrowed nearly the entire purchase price, 90% of it funded by the bank. He used the building itself as collateral, meaning if he failed, the bank could take it back. Everyone around him thought he was insane. His own father told him he was one bad month away from losing everything. But here's where it gets interesting. Sam fixed the building up using more borrowed money. New paint, new plumbing, new tenants. Within 2 years, the building was fully rented and its value had jumped by 60%. Now here's the part that changes everything. Sam didn't sell the building to cash in on that profit. Instead, he went back to the bank and borrowed against the building's new, higher value. He pulled out cash, tax-free, and used that money as a down payment on a second building, then a third, then a fourth. 10 years later, Sam owned 22 properties. He had used the bank's money over and over again to build a portfolio worth tens of millions of dollars. The strange part is, Sam never used much of his own money at all. So what actually happened here? Let's break it down in plain terms. Debt at its core is simply borrowed time. It lets you use tomorrow's money today. If you use that borrowed money to buy something that grows in value or generates income, the debt becomes a tool. The asset pays for itself, and you keep the upside. But if you use that same borrowed money to buy something that loses value the moment you take it home, like a new car or the latest phone, the debt becomes a trap. There's no engine underneath it generating more money. There's just a bill, growing quietly every month. This is the one distinction almost nobody teaches in school, and it's the entire reason rich people are comfortable with debt while ordinary people fear it. They're not talking about the same thing. They just call it by the same name. Here's what most people miss. Sam wasn't rich because he avoided risk. He was rich because he understood exactly which risks were worth taking and which ones were landmines. And that brings us to the real psychological trap that keeps most people stuck. Picture this. A woman named Claire graduates college with $18,000 in credit card debt. Clothes, dinners, a car she couldn't quite afford, all swiped away one purchase at a time. 10 years later, she's still paying it off. The original $18,000 has cost her almost $30,000 once you count the interest. Now picture a different version of Claire. Same income, same starting point. But this Claire borrowed $12,000 to get a certification that doubled her salary within 2 years. Same tool. Debt. Completely different results. Here's why this happens, and it comes down to something psychologists call the immediacy trap. Our brains are built to crave instant reward. When Claire swiped her credit card for a new outfit, her brain got an immediate hit of pleasure. The pain of paying for it was pushed 30 days into the future, and then pushed again and again for years. But when she borrowed money for that certification, there was no instant reward at all. Just months of studying, discomfort, and delayed payoff. Her brain fought against it the entire way. This is the strange part. The debt that destroys people usually feels good in the moment. The debt that builds wealth usually feels uncomfortable in the moment. Wealthy families train their children to sit through that discomfort. Ordinary families, often without meaning to, train their children to chase the instant reward instead. Think about it this way. If you borrow money to buy a boat, the moment you drive it home, its value starts dropping. You're now making monthly payments on something worth less every single day. That's debt working against you. But if you borrow money to buy a small business generating $50,000 a year in profit, every payment you make is funded by the business itself, and you still own something valuable at the end. Same interest rate, same monthly payment, completely opposite direction. And this is where it gets uncomfortable for a lot of people watching this video, because most of us have been taught to feel shame around debt, any debt, without ever being taught to separate the two. That shame keeps people avoiding good debt out of fear, while they quietly sink deeper into bad debt without even noticing. But there's something even bigger going on here, something that explains why banks treat wealthy people so differently. Here's a question almost nobody asks. Why would a bank ever want to lend anyone money in the first place? The answer is simple once you see it. Banks don't make money when you pay off your debt. They make money on the interest while you're carrying it. Which means, from a bank's perspective, the ideal customer isn't someone who's debt-free. It's someone who reliably pays interest for a very long time on a very large amount without ever defaulting. Now think about who fits that description best. A person with a shaky income and no assets is a huge risk to a bank. If they lose their job, the loan could go unpaid. So banks charge that person a higher interest rate because they're compensating for risk. That's why payday loans, the debt that traps the poorest people, often carry interest rates above 300% a year. But a wealthy business owner with millions in real estate, a stable income, and assets that can be seized if things go wrong is one of the safest bets a bank can make. So the bank offers them a lower rate, sometimes under 5%. Here's what nobody realizes. The less you actually need the money, the cheaper it becomes to borrow it. This sounds backwards, but it's exactly how the system works. Wealth doesn't just buy comfort, it buys access to cheaper debt, and cheaper debt compounds into more wealth, which unlocks even cheaper debt after that. This is sometimes called the wealth flywheel, and once it starts spinning, it becomes incredibly hard for anyone to catch up who isn't already inside it. Let's put real numbers on this so it clicks. Say a wealthy investor borrows $1 million at 4% interest to buy an apartment complex generating 8% returns a year. The spread between what they pay in interest and what the property earns becomes pure profit, layered on top of an asset that's also rising in value. Meanwhile, someone without assets borrows $10,000 on a credit card at 24% interest just to cover an emergency car repair. There's no asset earning anything on the other side. It's a pure cost, quietly compounding against them. Both people are in debt. One is getting richer because of it. The other is getting poorer because of it. And this changes everything about how you should think of the word debt, because because debt itself is neutral. It's just a contract. The direction it pushes your life depends entirely on what's sitting on the other side of that borrowed money. But there's one more layer to this that most people never consider, and it might be the most important one of all. Imagine you borrow $200,000 today to buy a property. 20 years from now, you'll still owe roughly the same number of dollars, assuming a fixed rate. But here's the twist. Because of inflation, $200,000 20 years from now buys far less than it does today. Prices rise, wages rise. The value of a dollar quietly shrinks every single year, which means the debt you're paying back is being paid back in dollars that are worth less than the dollars you originally borrowed. This is one of the quiet advantages the wealthy have understood for generations. When you borrow money and use it to buy something that rises in value alongside or faster than inflation, like real estate or a business, time is working in your favor twice over. The asset appreciates, and the debt effectively shrinks in real terms. If you just save cash under a mattress or even in a low-interest savings account, inflation is quietly eating away at what that money can buy year after year. Here's the psychological piece that ties this whole video together. Ordinary financial advice, the kind most of us grow up hearing, is built around the idea of safety. Avoid debt, save cash, live below your means. And for basic financial stability, that advice isn't wrong. But wealth isn't built on safety alone. It's built on understanding leverage, which is simply the ability to control something valuable using less of your own money. A person who saves for 10 years to buy one house in cash has used leverage 0 times. A person who borrows to buy 4 properties over the same 10 years using the bank's money each time has multiplied their exposure to rising asset values by 4. If prices rise by even a modest amount, that leverage transforms a small gain into a massive one because it's applied across a much bigger base of assets. This is exactly what happened to the man from the very beginning of this video. The one who borrowed for his house wasn't just buying a home. Without even realizing it, he was practicing the same principle the wealthiest families in the world have used for centuries. He controlled an asset worth $300,000 using only $60,000 of his own money. When that house rose in value, his gain was measured against the $60,000 he actually put in, not the full price. That's the quiet mathematics of leverage. And it's the real reason rich people love debt. Not because debt is free, not because it's risk-free, but because used correctly, it turns a modest amount of money into control over something much larger and lets time and inflation do the heavy lifting from there. Here's the truth most people never get told directly. Debt was never the villain. Fear of understanding debt is the real trap. The wealthy aren't reckless risk-takers throwing money at anything with a loan attached. They've simply learned to ask one question before borrowing a single dollar. Does this debt buy me something that earns or something that only spends? Everything else follows from that one question. The credit card for a vacation, the car loan for a status symbol, the buy now pay later app for another pair of shoes, these all answer that question the same way. They spend. They don't earn. And every month they sit there, they quietly work against you. But a loan for a rental property, a loan for a business that generates income, a loan for an education that raises your earning power for the rest of your life, these answer the question differently. They earn. And used with discipline, they let time and other people's money build something you couldn't have built alone. The house at the start of this story wasn't really about real estate at all. It was about two completely different relationships with the exact same tool. One man saw debt as something to escape. The other saw it as something to use. 15 years later, only one of them had multiplied what he started with. The next time you look at a loan, a mortgage, or a line of credit, don't just ask whether you can afford the payment. Ask what that borrowed money is actually going to do while it sits in your hands. Because the difference between a life spent working to pay off debt and a life where debt quietly works for you was never about how much money you had to begin with. It was always about which side of that question you were standing on.